Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 21st episode of Kyle's Corner. I'm joined by my new friend Brian here, who is the YouTube channel Belltube. Makes fantastic videos, some of my favorite to watch. Really love his energy. It feels like you've been around for a lot longer than you have, Brian, and that is a testament to how much people have embraced you. So thank you so much for coming on my channel and giving us a chance to actually have a long form conversation.
Oh,
Nice to see you.
absolutely. I thank you. And thank you for that very nice compliment. There's days that I feel like I've been doing this for a week, and there's days like I feel like I've been doing this for several years. So I'm glad it feels like I've been around a little bit longer than I have because it's not even been 11 months yet. So it's still
That's crazy
it's
that
still
it's still
relatively
in your
new.
first year. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And thanks
And
for having me today. I love coming on other channels and I watch Kyle's Corner all the time and I watch when you are on other people's live streams. So this is a lot of fun for me too.
oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's I find I just really like the long form conversations because you get to really chat with everybody and have really get to know them and stuff.
Hmm.
We have Esme in the chat here.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, Esme. Love Esme.
yeah, Esme says you are a pillar of the community already, and I agree.
Wow. Thanks, Esme. She would know. I mean, she is quite well versed in booktube.
Esme is one of those people that everybody knows, and just everybody knows is wonderful. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, she's the best.
And she's
I
extremely
actually.
I was gonna say she's really positive towards creators too, because sometimes
Mhm.
when we upload things, we don't know if they're any good. And we get a comment from Esme saying it was one of her favorite things she saw all week. So she is quite uplifting, not only just in my comments, but really all the comments that I see that she, is involved in.
Yeah, I totally agree. She's a gem. Um, what made you first want to start your channel? I think I've heard you talk about this before a little bit, but from my perspective, you just really got into Mike's channel and you're like, I can do this. But is there a spark that made you decide to do it? And what were some of the learning curves that you had to get to at the first start of your channel?
Yeah, awesome question. I think part of it was a combination of a few things. One, I had a little bit more time on my hands when my bar closed, and we can talk about that, whenever. But I had some time on my hands that I wanted to do something. And I'd watched a ton of Mike's channels, and through Mike, I watched a lot of Philip's channels, and then happened to see Tori and Madison on Mike's channel, and I wound up I found myself in the Keymark Discord about a year ago, April. So about 18 months ago. And I was doing one of the readathons and I was on Tori's team. And I became, really close with Tori. She's our team captain and she's from Minnesota as well. And
Hmm.
her and I just got to be friends and we would Discord message each other back and forth. And I kept saying, I'm thinking about starting a channel. I don't really know if I do. I need it to be different than everything else that's on BookTube because I just feel like I want to add something that's kind of uniquely me, if possible.
Hmm.
And I don't just want to regurgitate what everybody else is doing. That would be not interesting enough for me to stick to it for, any period of time. And she was extremely positive about it. And I had messaged Philip, and this is actually a funny story too, because I didn't know anything about video creation. I knew stuff about audio because of the bar, but in terms of video editing and cameras and all that, I reached out to Philip and asked him, totally unaware that there's probably not a least technically savvy person on BookTube than Philip. But he was super kind and said, well, you're talking to the wrong guy for sure, but this is what I do. And, I absolutely hope you take the plunge. That was his word. I hope you take the plunge. And I decided, you know what? Why not? I can get some gear on Amazon if I put videos together and I find that either nobody likes it or I don't like it or I don't have anything to talk about. There's a 30-day return policy on all of this stuff. Um, let's just give it a shot and see what I think about it. Cause I'm just a big believer in if you've got a thought and you want to try it, it's super easy to kick the can down the road and come up with reasons to, delay it. And I just said, you know
Hmm.
what? Now's as good a time as any. Let me jump into this thing. And see what I think about it. And I could not have asked for a better experience so far.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Real quick before I go on to what I was going to say, have you read
Yeah,
First Law?
I have. I've read all of it.
Yeah, so that just reminds me of the it's better to do it than live with the fear of doing it, which you kind of embodied by your personal mantra there.
Yeah,
Um,
love First Law.
Tori is fantastic, so I'm glad that she did that. And I find that the peer pressure in this community is like positive and also like very helpful because that's the
Mhm.
exact same thing that happened to me. I was in Sarah Reed's Discord and I had been mentioning like starting a channel, and they just made like a separate channel that was like Kyle starting a channel or something like that, and they just messaged
Cool.
me like every day, being like, "You started your
Awesome.
channel yet? You started your channel yet?" And so I was like, "Fine, I'll do it." And so that nudge was so nice.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's
Very great
encouraging
community.
and it's encouraging to think that people might have value in, might find value in the things that you're talking about. Because I think until like I was not really part of a Discord other than Keymark for that readathon. And Tori invited
Mhm.
me to become part of her Discord as well, which I, accepted. And but apart from that, I'm really not active in Discord at all. So I didn't have those pre-connections
Mhm.
to have kind of like a built-in um, support network, other than the fact that I had found myself in people's live streams all the time when anybody would go live, and I would try to make a comment that I could get a smile out of the host, maybe break their train of thought a little bit, because my thought was at least it'll be memorable. And if I ever do a channel, they'll remember this Brian Bell guy. There's not a whole lot of former nightclub owners that are doing booktube, so I guess I kind of have that,
You might be the only one. Yeah.
I probably so. So yeah, I just, wanted to participate in all the conversations that it seemed like everybody was having. And I felt like it would be fun. And there'd be a group of people here that are largely positive. I gravitate towards the positive booktube channels far more than the ranty type of booktube channels. And I just thought these would be some really cool friends that don't live by me. And let me go out and make some new friends.
Yeah, it's so difficult. Like, so I've worked in the bar industry since I was 18,
Yeah.
and you have worked in there for a while. And one thing I want to talk to you about is like, how many of your coworkers like read? Like, did you just like not talk to them about that at all? Because I have almost never met someone in the
Yeah.
nightclub industry that reads, and if they do read, they read like, how to win friends and influence people.
Yeah.
They never read fiction. And
Yeah.
so, like, when you told me that, or when I heard that you were a nightclub owner, I was like, and he reads so much fantasy. Like, I was like, that's such a combination that's unique. So,
Yeah. So, in terms of science fiction fantasy, a total of one. And he happened to be one of our DJs.
oh,
And
nice.
it was great because before the club got open, we'd sit and talk about books. And then after the night was done, he'd come up to my office and I'd get him paid and we'd sit and talk about whatever books we were reading. And to this day, we still, communicates. He watches a lot of my lives. Um, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun. I have some other people that worked at the club, like some of the go-go dancers and stuff. And yes, they are go-go dancers, not adult entertainers. Just typical 50s go-go dancers that read more of the romanticy stuff.
Hmm.
So we do communicate, on that level because they used to be more contemporary fiction and now they're moving into ACOTAR and Fourth Wing and all of
They've
that.
gotten
So
it into the pipeline. Yeah.
yeah, so now they're into the fantasy a little bit, and I'm finding little spaces here and there to message them saying, "Hey, this doesn't have the spice that you are probably accustomed to, but I think you might like this book." So, yeah.
This is a really good, like, for people just getting into fantasy. I'm sure you know this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Getting people hooked on Mistborn is a really good. I know it's like not like romance at
Mhm.
all, but I have given out or recommended maybe like 8 or 9 copies of Mistborn, and all but one of them have been a hit. I feel like
Awesome.
that's a really good gateway into getting people into the
Yeah,
genre.
I totally agree. I've described it before as, to people that I'm trying to sell the book to is imagine Ocean's 11, but everybody's a wizard.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I have this copy right here actually is because I'm bringing it to someone to work tomorrow. So it's
Oh,
like I have it
nice.
ready to go. So
Cool.
yeah, I'm churning that Sanderson propaganda machine, getting it going.
I love it.
Yeah, he needs to, send me some Wind and Truth arcs in response.
You think?
Yeah.
I did. It's really funny. They had this sort of random anybody can apply to be on a Dragonsteel panel. I was like, you know what? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So I apply to be, a panelist. On what I would, what panel I'd ever wind up on is no idea. I expected zero chance of being selected, and that's exactly what happened. But yeah, I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply
Hey,
to
you
be
never
on.
know. Maybe next year. Maybe next year they'll have heard about the booktube phenomenon or the
Y-
Belltube phenomenon,
you
and they'll.
know, I've no idea. I don't. I don't know where the
You
channel's
can
going
go
to
for
be.
the White Sands year. That's the year. That's the Brian Belltube
All
brand is
right,
White Sands.
cool, cool.
How much Sanderson have you read? Like I know you've read a little, but
I've
have
read all
you?
of it. I've read all of it
Okay,
except for the secret projects and
okay.
Elantris.
Oh right, I
And
remember you asking yesterday about if they're worth the time.
yeah, so I haven't read Secret Projects. I haven't read Elantris. I haven't read Dawn Shard, and I've read everything else. And I've actually read the Reckoners too, which is
I'm
surprising
reading
because
The Reckoners right now, and it's
yeah,
fine.
it's
It's
okay.
okay.
I
Like
mean,
it's like I think if I read it as a teenager, I'd like it a lot more. But I'm just like, oh yeah,
yeah,
it's the boys, but less the
yeah.
boys.
I mean,
So
I liked, and it's been a long time since I read them, but I liked the first book. I think the best of the Reckoners, and then it sort of got a little stale for me.
yeah.
But not a bad story. I mean, if you want
Yeah.
something light and it's not going to crush your brain, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, at this point, I'm just trying to I have like 4 Sanderson books left, so I might as well just read them all to say I've read all of his
Sure.
books.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like nothing about it's bad. It's just fine.
Mhm.
Regarding the secret projects, I know I was kind of talking about it with you yesterday, but I think that Sunlit Man will be your jam.
Okay.
I think you'll like it. I don't think it'll like blow you away like top of all time, but I think you'll really like it. With Yumi, do you watch any anime
I
or
don't.
anything?
I
Okay.
don't. It's interesting too because, like, I think anime for people like I look at Alan, for example, who's like super into anime, and he's just enough younger than me that anime became super popular when he was a kid, but it wasn't a thing really when I was a kid. So as an adult, I never really just jumped into anime. I think I
I
saw
think Alan
Yu-Gi-Oh
would disagree
episodes.
with you.
What do
Yeah,
you mean?
Yu-Gi-Oh! I think he would disagree with you about it being popular when he was younger. I feel like all he talks about is how he was getting swirlies in the toilet for liking One Piece and stuff.
Oh,
But
okay.
but I'm sure like, I totally know what you mean. Like
But I mean, the
it
fact,
became there was the wave
I'm,
of people that liked it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the fact that it was even on and available,
Right. For
because when
sure.
I was, the age that he was in getting swirlies, that wasn't on.
Have you watched any Miyazaki Studio Ghibli movies like Howl's Moving Castle or anything like that?
I haven't.
Oh, dude. Like even if you don't like anime, like
Yeah.
Studio Ghibli is fantastic. Like all
No.
ages, all
Awesome.
everything. Like I watched Howl's Moving Castle and then Spirited Away during the pandemic. And it
Okay.
was just something that I had heard was always good. My wife and I were watching it, and I watched Howl's Moving Castle and I finished it. I was like, that was like one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Really?
And then I watched Spirited Away, and I was like, I think I liked Spirited Away even more. Like they're very good. I highly recommend them, and they're
Awesome.
all on
Well,
Netflix if you want to give them a
I
shot.
have time this week, so
Yeah,
you have added to my media this week. Thank you, Read by
yeah.
Kyle.
And what I was gonna say about that though is if you like Studio Ghibli,
Yeah.
I think most of You Mean the Nightmare Painter will hit for you because I feel
Okay.
like it's
Cool.
very Studio Ghibli,
Awesome.
and a little bit more romance focused, which I know is not your thing, but still good world building and stuff.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. So Adam says that it was the complete nerd stuff, possibly even past that part of the nerd bell curve when he was growing up.
Interesting.
And
Well, but it was there. It was at least available
yeah, for
for the
sure.
nerds. Yeah.
Hello, Tori. We were just talking about you. We said that you're wonderful and fantastic, and then we were mean for a little bit. Just kidding. We weren't mean.
Yeah, just cut the mean parts out, Tori. We'll
um,
timestamp the mean parts for you.
so when did you start reading fantasy? Like, were you always a fantasy reader,
Oh
or
yeah. So I was looking this up the other day, and I started reading fantasy when I was about 9, and there was a particular book called The Big Joke Game by an author named Scott Corbett, and it's just like it's a kid's book. It's really elementary grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and I read it. Actually looked it up online. It's like $100 to find a copy these days. But it was about basically this kid who gets transported to another world. And I just loved the premise of that. And when I was a kid like that, the Hobbit cartoon came out and I was really into that. So those were really my starters. But when I turned about 11-ish or so, maybe 12, I really got into Piers Anthony, and that would be like the Xanth series and the Incarnations of Immortality. And you got to also remember the bookstore, fantasy section was basically one bookshelf. I mean, that's it.
Right.
And so if you weren't picking up Lord of the Rings and you were 11 or 12, you were really pushed, towards Piers Anthony. And I loved those books. So I went right from there to the Dragonlance books, which I read all of those probably when I was about 12. And ever since then, I was a lifelong reader. I've been a lifelong reader, and fantasy and sci-fi have been my jam. More so fantasy, but there are certainly times when I'm reading science fiction that I'm just so glad I'm reading a science fiction book and not fantasy.
Awesome. What do you think it is about fantasy that really draws you to it? I feel like people have different reasons for finding comfort in fantasy.
It's changed over the years. So,
Mhm.
like when I was really younger, I was sort of wide-eyed about the universe and thought that maybe some of the stuff is real. I mean, as weird as that sounds, it's like maybe it's not on our planet, but maybe this kind of thing could happen somewhere else. And so my imagination was really sparked by fantasy books. And I just loved it. I loved the thought of what if magic was actually real? And
Mhm.
it just absolutely consumed me in those earlier ages. As I got a little bit older, and I want to say like, high school, 20s and beyond, it's really become more of dependent on the author, right? So like if I really want to, yes, if I really want to get into a character study and feel like I'm living another person's life, then I would turn to something like Realm of the Elderlings, where it's almost like an out of body experience where you're reading something in first person really throughout their whole life. And I like that. I like the idea of, and I think it's probably George Martin or somebody who said, if a person who reads, lives 1,000 lives or
Mhm.
something like that. But I really did feel like that, and I still do. And there are other authors, like you had mentioned, Joe Abercrombie with First Law, that I'm drawn to the fantasy because I feel like I'm a kindred spirit with this guy where he likes fantasy, but he also has a great sense of humor. And
Mhm.
I feel like I connect with the author like almost more on a meta level that I understand what he's doing and I'm just totally so appreciative of it. So there's things like that. But yeah, all of those things kind of rolled into one, I think,
Right.
is my just love of fantasy. And I just like, I like contemporary fiction. We just read, Mike, Philip, and John and I just read Ordinary Grace, and it's great. There's no magic, there's no sci fi. It's just a contemporary fiction story. And I liked it, but I would have liked it more if somebody had magic. So, yeah,
Yeah. See, I came to the genre backwards in the sense that I always liked it, but I didn't admit that I liked this genre. I was telling myself I liked the exceptions. So like I was like, oh, I grew up on Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. That's like the all times, right?
sure.
And then I was like, I don't like fantasy, so I would never reach for like other fantasy really. Like I never read Narnia as a kid. I never read Philip Pullman or any of these like popular ones around the age that I was around. And then I found A Song of Ice and Fire, and I just was like, I'm gonna reread this for the rest of my life. And I think the only other fantasy book that I read for most of my life was like American Gods and then Mark Lawrence's Prince of Nothing trilogy.
Sure.
I was like, I don't really like fantasy, but all my favorite series were fantasy. And it was almost 4 years ago today, actually, that a friend recommended I try Way of Kings. And I was like, that is a really big fantasy book.
Sure.
And I started it and I loved it. And by the time I finished the book, I was like, oh, I think I like fantasy. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that like I don't know why it took so long for me to admit to myself that I liked it. But once I did, then I was just like, now so much more is open to me because there's like fantasy can be anything. And I think that's what's so good about it is that like yeah, you have the Tolkien-esque fantasy, but you
Hmm.
have so many different, you have Jade City,
Hmm.
you have China Mieville, you have all these different like imaginations that you can play around with, and I just think that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Sword and Sorcery was like a really popular one for a long time, and I think that's still what, like, I was talking to a coworker recently who reads. She says she reads every genre, and I was like, "Oh, great! Like, what fantasy do you read?" She's like, "Oh, I don't think I would like fantasy," and I was like, "But it is every genre. Like, it's not
Yeah.
just Tolkien." Like, and I was like, I gotta bring you Mistborn and just see.
Yeah. I
And
mean, and all of these stories, came from somebody had just commented about mythology. And I was a huge Greek and Roman mythology nerd as a kid. I just couldn't get enough of those stories. And then I got into the Norse mythology and some of the Egyptian mythology. And it's like, and yeah, to what
we have
Janice,
Janny Wurts in the chat. Hello, Janny. Nice to see you. And
oh,
yes,
she's the
fantasy is
greatest.
the language of
It
dreams.
is. And I think you can almost in some regard more deeply explore some themes if we introduce elements that are not possible in the real world, because we can just expand what is actually possible. So yeah, mythology was to kind of further answer that prior question, mythology was a big part of my growing up as well, because I just loved all those stories.
Do you have like a preference? Like, are you more into the Greek mythology, or what's your
Kyle, it's
go-to
been
there?
so long that I don't have a preference. I've
Mhm.
probably run into more Norse than anything,
Oh, yeah.
just because a lot of the books that have come out have been more in that area than following, Greek and Roman mythologies or
Mhm.
mythos. Um, Big fan of God of War series, so
Yeah.
if you're a gamer at all, I don't know, but I am, and so this most recent couple of games of God of War was highly focused in the Norse, yeah, Norse and Minnesota, right? Um, so yeah,
I
and
am a
no,
big
no,
gamer. I actually God of War, like the new, not the sequel,
hmm
but the 2018 one or whenever
hmm
that was. I played for a while and I really liked it, and then I got stuck on a spot and I didn't play for like 2 months. And then when I
hmm
went back, I have literally no idea what I was doing. And I was like far enough into the game, and I was like stuck in like a dungeon. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And I
yeah,
was like, I'm not restarting this game. And so I just moved on to another game. But now
yeah,
that it's been like, 5 years or whatever, I'm like, I should just restart and
sure,
replay it because I thought it was a really great game.
it is. And the thing about video games is that it requires some muscle memory in those types in particular. And if you take extended breaks or if you pop in some different games between what you're playing and the buttons are entirely different,
Oh
your
yeah.
brain just doesn't sync up right away. I've been playing the same game now for 2.5 months and I haven't moved off of it because I don't want to forget what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And like there's some games that I've played so much. Like if I go back to Civilization, I always remember how to play it. But anything where like, press X to fight, but then in another game it's press Y to fight, I'm
Yeah,
just like, oh, that'll really throw you when you need the chips down. So
yeah,
I try to
yeah,
only stick to one like RPG game at a time or something like
absolutely.
that. What
I
are you
mean,
playing right now?
I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3 right now.
Oh, nice. I really
Um,
want to play that.
which I just love, and I'm a big D&D fan. So that was, when that game came out, I waited about a year to play it just because it had sort of come out right when I was thinking about starting this YouTube channel. And I knew if I start getting into Baldur's Gate 3 right now, this is going to basically kill my channel because I need
Yeah.
to spend the time learning how to do YouTube. So I
Right.
only picked up Baldur's Gate a couple of months ago, and I just completely love it. But it's got a cool story, and my taste in video games are very, it sort of goes hand in hand with fantasy reading in that I'm drawn to narrative driven games. I'm not a big hack and slash guy. I can have fun with Doom for like 20 minutes, but then it's just, there's no story and I'm bored. But things that have complicated or interesting or unique ways of telling stories within a video game, those are the ones that, I can't get enough of.
Yeah, I love strategy games like Civ and Romance of the Three Kingdoms and stuff. But other than that, I really love like all my favorite games. Like Final Fantasy VIII is one of my
Mhm.
favorite games of all time. And the people, I don't know, have you played Final Fantasy?
I have not. I'm not a JRPG guy, but I could be. By the way,
Oh,
if anybody's wondering, that's Japanese role playing game. I just never really got into it. I
yeah.
think a lot of it is because I was on Xbox for so long,
Oh, yeah.
and
Well, that answers that question.
most of that was PC and PlayStation.
Mhm. So Final Fantasy VIII is my favorite of the Final Fantasy games, which is like an abnormal opinion. And there's a lot of like really good criticisms about that game. But I just fell in love with that story. Like I still think it's like one of the best stories that I've ever like experienced.
Hmm.
It's just like every time I replay that game, I just love it. And that kind of things is really important to me. And it does transition into reading because those are the things that I remember. I don't remember the hours I spent playing Doom or the hours I
Right.
spent hacking and slashing or playing Call of Duty or whatever. I just
Yeah.
that's just mindless to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Um, you really like Shogun. Are
I
you
do.
going to read the follow ups, or are you going to one and done it, or how are you thinking about that?
I will read all of the Asian saga. It's just a matter of when. I
Hmm.
am I'm completely ripping off Theo and ripping off John, who did their priority series videos coming out, and I'm going to do one of those this week. And as I look at these priority, series that I have coming up, man, I don't know when I'm going to get back to James Clavell. I feel
Yeah,
like, according to everybody who's read the Asian Saga, I've already read the best book. So it's like I don't know how like motivated I am to jump into it. Somebody has just started reading King Rat and didn't like it. It was a booktuber that I like, and just off the top of my head, I don't remember who it was. But
probably Alan. Me and
yeah,
Alan both DNF'd it. Yeah.
yeah, okay, there you go. It was probably both you guys. And that, it's like I want to stand firm in my TBRs for the most part, but when I find booktubers that I generally jive with, when it comes to tastes and they align and they're DNFing stuff, and it's not necessarily because it's the wrong timing for them, but they just legit have reasons to not read it. It certainly doesn't push it up my TBR. It
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily knock it off the TBR, but it might kick it down the can a bit, kick it down the road. So I don't know. I
So like
suspect it.
eventually, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hopefully in the next couple of years. But when I
Hmm.
do this priority video and I started kind of thinking about what books are going to be, what series are going to be on that list, and it is daunting. And it's going to take me 2 or 3 years, I think, to properly get through some of these series because I don't bounce back and forth between series very often. I like to just go through it, and not get overly caught up in long breaks in dense series. More books that are longer than trilogies.
Yeah, it's never really bothered me to be in a lot of series at once. Like I think I did like I tallied up the ones that it was like 32 or something like that, and then I've since added more, and
Hmm.
then that's not counting like something like Stormlight where I'm waiting
Hmm.
for the next book, and that has
Yeah.
never bothered me until recently because it started reaching critical mass where like series I really wanted to get back to, I realized I haven't picked up the next book in like 8 months. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how is this happening? Like it's taking too long. So I've actually been for the first time much firmer in my DNFs. In terms of like series DNFs. I started Streets of Laredo like 2 days ago, which is the sequel to Lonesome Dove.
Yep.
Lonesome Dove is my favorite book of the year.
Yep.
And I just decided 10% into that book, I was like, I have no interest in reading this. Lonesome Dove is going to remain a standalone for me. And it was just liberating to just take that all those extra books off the TBR.
Yeah.
So,
I'm the same way. Lonesome Dove won my official book of the year last year. And it's interesting because as much as I loved that book, there's just something about it that it feels like a completed story to me. And
mhm,
it's not so much that I don't want to wreck my experience with Lonesome Dove by reading books that I might not like as much in the series, and then I'm trying to hold it, in on a pedestal. It's just like I don't know. I'm not compelled to go pick
mhm.
up Streets of Laredo. I'm not compelled to go pick up the prequels. I might be compelled. I might talk to Durfee or Mike sometime and who've read them all and go, I really do need to get on this. And if they sell it hard on me, then terrific. But for right now, man, the list of books that I have out there is just it's daunting. So yeah.
Yeah, I will say, mileage may vary because Mike liked Streets of Laredo, and I'm
Hmm.
sure some people do. But I regret even starting it because the stuff that happens at the very beginning of that book makes me like Lonesome Dove a little less. Like
Yeah,
I'm hoping with time that I'll just forget because like
yeah,
I'm not going to tell you anything that happened. Don't worry about that.
yeah.
But like the book opens up and several extremely major things have happened in between books, and it's just kind of like, oh yeah, here's what happened, and
Sure.
it's so jarring, and it's also just like, why would you ruin the end of Lonesome Dove for me? Like,
Yeah.
it was really jarring, and I just put it down. I'm just like, I'm not interested in this. But just to answer Tori's question about Alan and Taipan, I don't know which one he likes better than, or which one he thinks is better. I think he likes Taipan more, which is kind of my thoughts too. Which is that I personally enjoyed Taipan more, probably because it was a little bit more compact. But I think Shogun is Clavel's best novel, and I also DNF'd Gaijin, and Josh
Interesting.
and Alan finished Gaijin, and both of them were pretty middling on it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why I wanted to bring that up because
Yeah.
I was excited to. I know you love Shogun, and I was
Hmm.
excited to continue on with them, and it's just been mostly unrewarding to me to continue. I
Yeah.
only have Noble House left. I'm still going to read it, but so
Yeah.
far I kind of wish that I had just not.
Just
And to
stuck with
answer
that. Yeah.
Tori's question about King Rat, I just don't think I like the time period, and it's just like a really rough, like its first book, and it's World War II, and I just wasn't really feeling it. And I'm trying, like I said, I was trying to like get rid of series, so I just bounced on that one.
Sure. I'm going to answer a question that Pete had in the chat a little bit ago. One thing
Sure.
that you'll never see me do when I'm on anybody's channel is type in the chat. It is such a huge pet peeve of mine when people come on my show and they're like in chat. I'm like, dude, we're here. And I know everybody does it. It's just like not a big deal, but for me, it's like
I
I
I
hate it.
actually sorry. Answer Pete's question, and
Pete's
then
question was, "Is have I played Disco Elysium?" I love
oh
Disco Elysium. Not only have I played it, I've probably watched 3 or 4 YouTube playthroughs of different, YouTubers and Twitch streamers. Um, Totally interesting story, totally, like, weird. I like weird stuff, and Disco Elysium is weird and just something completely out of left field. And I'm sort of bummed out that that studio disbanded because, yeah, of course you will, Tori. Um, I'm bummed out that that studio disbanded because there's really, but maybe it's for the best, right? Maybe it's like a Shogun type of a deal or a Lonesome Dove that you
mhm.
got the pinnacle and maybe you didn't want the sequel.
Yeah, sometimes it's just better to just not have it. Um, I agree with you generally about people being in chat, but I've noticed since I've been hosting stuff more that I'm more
Mhm.
because like when you're hosting, you're in a different mindset than when you're in a guest,
Yeah,
and you have to like be more really aware of the chat so you can
sure.
like make sure to bring in questions when necessary and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. And I was on Fantasy Watch Laura's channel yesterday, and for
Hmm.
the first time ever, I realized I was like responding to chat while she was talking, and I did it like 3 or 4 times. And I was like, I am being so rude right now. But
Yeah.
it's just like because I'm so used to like
Yeah. You're used
triple
to doing it.
checking the chats. But I agree with you. It's a pet peeve of mine too,
Well,
and I
it's
did not
like
follow that.
do you know what it is? It's almost like I feel like if you're out to dinner with somebody and you're trying to have a conversation and they're texting somebody.
Yeah, I totally
Um,
agree.
it's like there's a time and a place, and so many of us are all in each other's live streams, right? Like, so yesterday I was in your live stream.
Hmm.
Jimmy, you get the exception. You're the Friday night delight. You basically can do whatever you like. So you have free reign whenever you come on my channel. But I just feel like, I like to have more of a targeted conversation. And obviously if I miss stuff in chat and the guest notices it, then sure, bring it up. But I just like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm like, I see them typing in chat. I'm like, what are you doing? Come on, we're here.
Well, Tori and I will make sure to irritate you whenever we're on your channel. Um, Heidi wants to talk about Guy Gavriel K, which is something I wanted to bring up. You
Sure.
just read the one Guy Gavriel K,
Two.
or have you read two? Two.
Two.
Okay, which two?
I've read Tigana and I've read The Lions of Alrasan.
And can you remind me of your opinions on the two of them? Because I think I
Both
remember, but lots of people have been reading
both
them
of, both
recently.
of them are 5 stars for me, and I am notoriously stingy about giving out 5 stars. I've a handful of 5 stars a year. That's about it. And both of them were. And I've got a song for our bone lined up. I think for November.
Nice. I just started Song for a Bone.
You're funny, Kyle.
What?
Responding to
Oh,
Jenny.
yeah, yeah. No, I just started Song for a Bone, and I'm really liking it. I mean, obviously, anybody who's listened to me talk knows that Sarantine Mosaic is my favorite guy, Gavriel K. I just find the way that he writes is maybe like my favorite prose. I
Yeah,
think it's just incredible.
yeah,
And even Tigana, which is maybe my least favorite of his prose, it was like very elegant.
yes.
And he's racketing up my favorite authors. Like I really want to finish his work soon.
He really is. And like what I've noticed is there's certain authors that you can almost pick a page randomly, okay, or even a paragraph and read it. And I feel like I've got a reasonable chance of knowing who the author is
Hmm.
based on what they do. Janny Wurts, for sure, one of them. Guy Gavriel K, definitely one of them. Joe Abercrombie, for sure, one of them. That they just have such a very specific writing style that's unique to them that I think if you read a couple of them and you like it, you can identify it pretty quick. And I see no real reason why I won't love A Song for a Bone. I know the Sailing to Serentium, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, so it's the first one, Sailing to Sarantium. It's part of the Sarantine Mosaic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know anybody who's read it that didn't, love it. So I think it's one of those authors that if you like their stuff, you're gonna like their stuff.
Well, what's interesting is that he has like two veins of writing, which is like the Tigana and Finnevar, which is more magical, and then the more
Hmm.
historical fantasy stuff. And there's plenty of people who like both, obviously.
Sure.
But I think Jake is really good at trying to recommend to people what they might like better, because for the longest time, I know now we have all these conversations about Guy Gabriel K.
Right.
About where to start, and you have
Yeah.
people starting with Lions, and you have people starting with Song for Abon and Brightness Long Ago. But for the longest time, it felt like people started with Tigana and then didn't really read anything else. Maybe
Sure.
they read Lions.
Yeah.
And that is not a very good indicator of what the rest of his books are. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that like that's his most popular,
Sure.
but it also isn't most representative.
But it's like I'm glad that I read Tigana first because for me, I love, the more magical elements that you
For
get in
sure.
that book versus Lines of Outer, even though just subjectively speaking, I think Lions is a better book. But I really loved the magic that was going on in that. And it was weird and different to me. So I'm glad I read that first because it, immediately was like, okay, this guy is vaulted to the top of my favorite authors list in literally one book. And that's pretty difficult to do. Especially like when we talk about somebody like James Clavell, right? Where Shogun, for me, I mean, unless something drastic happens, it's going to be my book of the year. And yet here I am, not even sure if I'm going to read the rest of the Asian saga. And if I do, it might be 3 years from now.
Right.
So Guy Gavriel K, on the other hand, it's like I'm already plotting out in advance when I'm getting these books because I just have so much confidence that, there's enough booktubers out there that I feel like my tastes align with that like the same kinds of prose that I do that I feel like, it's not going to be a bad experience. I might like some books better than others. That's normal.
Hmm.
But I don't feel like that there'd be any point or that there'd be any chance of me going, God, this guy forgot how to write a story or this is just terrible.
Yeah, it's definitely somebody that I'm trying to be a completionist for. Like I'm even trying to collect them all in hardcover, which I only do for like my top favorite authors. So would you say that like you have a problem comparing authors' work to other authors or to the same author's work? So for like instance, when you picked up Lions, were
Hmm.
you reading Lions thinking, "Oh, like is this going to compare to Tagana?"
No,
Or do you find that it's just that experience is that experience?
that experience is that experience.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Unless it's in a series, right? So, I mean, Realm of the Elderlings, I may compare books within books because it's all part of a series, but I don't really necessarily compare author to their other unrelated works.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I read Mercy of Gods same
Hmm.
time as Leviathan Wakes.
Yeah.
And I was reading Leviathan Wakes for that like Ben and Jake TBR contest. And Ben kind of jokingly was like, "Oh, that would influence you by reading the more polished stuff." And I was like really thinking about it. And I was like, I just don't think like it even occurred to me to compare the two more than just intellectually as to whether how the author's grown. But like it's just a different like my
Yeah.
brain goes into a different mode, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially in that particular example, because you're dealing with 2 people,
Mhm,
and we don't know, are they writing half of it each? Or, is one book more influenced by the other? I mean, yes, it's a combined unit, but it's still 2 individual people, and I suspect certain sections of certain books were probably written more by one than the other. We'll never know, but
mhm.
that could be part of it in that particular author example.
Yeah. I think in the later books, Daniel Abraham wrote more of it just
Okay.
because, Ty Franck was on the set for The Expanse more often. I think
Okay.
they've said that, but, I
Okay.
mean, yeah, we'll never know the exact breakdowns and stuff like
Right.
that. Have you read any of The Expanse?
I haven't. It's interesting. I started watching the series, and It was on it was on my TBR. It still is on my TBR. And I generally don't watch adaptations unless I've read the book if both are available. Like I like to read the book first and then I'll go watch the adaptation. And in this case, TBR Mountain was so huge and Mike was talking about the Expanse so much. And I was like, finally I relented. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just watch this. And I loved it. And then they canceled the the thing after I think book 5 or book 6 in the
Yeah.
series. And it seems like I don't really want to go back and read 5 books where I generally understand what's probably going to happen. At the same time, it sort of feels weird picking up The Expanse just where the TV show left off.
Mhm.
So I haven't really figured that out yet. Again, it's on TBR Mountain, but it's not super high up on the list right now.
Right.
There's so many, like I said, I was putting this together, this priority list. It was like, I was excited to make this video, and now I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to be doing nothing but reading for the next several years.
Yeah, I always, like, finish a book and then I'm like, "Okay, well, I wanna start this book," but I realize there's, like, this book is 9 other books. I was like, "Oh, no."
Yeah, right.
It's getting absurd. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna finish all this stuff in a reasonable time, and I read pretty fast, so, like, I still can't keep up.
Yeah,
Regarding The Expanse, though, so I say this is someone who's only read the first book and has not watched the show, so I actually have no, stake in the game about
yeah.
whether or not The Expanse is good. I do find that interesting because, like, just knowing the adaptations that I have seen and watched, or like watched and read, there's always so many differences. And like even just
Hmm.
the experience of reading the book,
Hmm.
like that would never occur to me, but that does occur to a lot of people that because I've already seen the story, I don't want to read the books. Is that something that like did that happen with you with A Song of Ice and Fire or anything like that?
I read Song of Ice and Fire before the show came out.
Oh, you lucky bastard.
Yes and no. I mean, it's like,
There's
I mean,
downsides.
there's so many series that I wish I hadn't read already prior to starting a channel because I'd have lots of content to talk about. If I was talking about my ongoing read of Wheel of Time or The Dark Tower or Realm of the Elderlings or a game of, A Song of Ice and Fire, all these series that I read way, way before I even saw anybody's booktube channel, I think it would make my life easier coming up with show ideas. But yeah, so no, I had already read everything. I was dating a girl at the time though who had not read the books, and she'd come over every Sunday night when it was on, and it was just kind of like watching TV, then like looking at her reaction and back and forth, and it's pretty fun.
Yeah, my wife didn't watch it until like the final season. I finally convinced her, so we got to like binge the show up until the final season, and then I was like,
Sure.
"Of course you're like watching it with me when I'm getting angry." Like I've spent 7 seasons mostly liking it.
Yeah.
Seven season I had a little bit of problems with, but
Yeah.
like season 8, it was mostly me just ranting to her and her just being like she has no idea what I'm nerding out
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. I mean, I legitimately loathed how they completed that show. Probably like most people, I think, that have read the books, even maybe some who haven't, because it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, I
What
mean, there's
Daenerys did at
all
the end
sorts
of
of
that made no sense to me. Who wound up being the king really made no sense to me. So it's just like,
how do you
talk
feel
about
about
like,
that being straight from Martin allegedly?
I think if it was straight from Martin, then and again, I don't know, but if it is, then I think he would do a better way of selling
Yeah,
that
that's what I think too. Yeah.
than what we got. Because I don't find it to be believable at all, and it's just I don't know. You talk about like a series getting derailed. Not only did that get derailed, it like flew off a cliff, um, it landed on another mountain, fell off that mountain, landed on a third, and flew off that one too. So that
I'm glad
was
you're keeping the hot takes alive of
yeah,
maybe season 8 of Game of Thrones might have been a little bad. I'm glad you're
yeah.
keeping that thought alive.
Isn't that just brave of me to
Very brave.
to take that risky stance?
Did you watch House of the Dragon?
I have, yeah, I liked
Yeah.
it.
Are you liking it? Yeah,
I
that's good.
yeah, and I've not read Fire and Blood, so
Oh, really?
yeah,
Interesting.
and that was sort of by design. Once I didn't even know Fire and Blood existed really until BookTube people started talking about it, and I don't know how it just was completely off my radar, but it was. And when the show came out, I just kind of was like, you know what? Let me experience this without knowing what happens because I didn't get to experience that with the Game of Thrones HBO show. So let me try it the other way around and be surprised and try to suss out what's happening and not already know how it ends. So I'm kind of
Hmm.
glad I did it that way as well because it's not like
Yeah.
I'm lacking books to read.
No, for
So
sure.
yeah.
I mean, Fire and Blood is fantastic. I think you're gonna really like it. I always love how much people are surprised when they really like it. Like Josh just finished it.
Hmm.
Bookborn's about to finish it. A few other people I'm blanking on right now have read it recently, and they're always like, "I'm surprised how much I liked it." I'm like, "It's really good," but as someone who, yeah, like you didn't get to experience all those shocks fresh, I think it will be interesting for you because there's some
Hmm.
wild stuff coming, and
That's
it'll
what
be
I hear.
nice. Yeah.
That's what I hear. Yeah. I mean, and I'm excited for it. And again, sometimes I just like to be surprised. And,
Hmm.
I find that sometimes the more I read, the less I get surprised, unless the author's just really good. Either because when they throw twists in, they're either clumsily done and they just don't make sense, or they're just out of nowhere and it just, again, doesn't make sense. But the ones that really put some twists in, I love. And so I love the fact that I'm not, that I get a chance to watch that show and try to sort out who I think is going to, ultimately win and who's going to survive. Because it's
Yeah.
Germ and we know it not, most people won't survive.
Well, it's a happy show. It's about butterflies and
Love and
hanging out and
kindness.
singing songs. Yeah,
Can't we
no,
all
for
just
sure.
get along?
Um,
I think season three's title of episode one is Kumbaya. I think that's what it is.
you saw the leak too. Yeah,
I
they
did.
just hold hands. Yeah,
I
no,
did.
yeah.
Yes.
Hmm. Is there a book series that, and I know you normally focus on the positive, so I was so shocked before I asked you this question when you just like vitriolically hating the magicians. I felt so vindicated because there's nothing like when somebody who's normally positive, because you really
Hmm.
are a very positive person in this sphere, and when you don't like something, you're just like, oh yeah, it's kind of not for me. Like, I could see why somebody would like this, but I don't. And
Hmm.
you were just like, the magicians is 0 out of 10. Like, you were just like, and I was like, yes.
I legitimately want to know what crimes against humanity you inflicted on Ben that drove him to make you read that book. I don't
I
know
thought he
if
was my friend. It was a betrayal of the highest magnitude.
it is literally. I don't rant like you said on the channel often. Maybe I would do better if I did, but that book is terrible. I will die on The Magicians is one of the worst fantasy books ever written. It's certainly the worst fantasy book I've ever read. And it's like crazy because it's a top book for Bane. It's Bryce over at Shelf Centered. It's a top 10 book for his. Um, yeah, it's like
Yeah,
exactly.
it's just the breaking
That's
point.
exactly when this all happened. We'll know when I
Yeah,
got triggered to make a rant channel instead. All of a
yeah.
sudden, like my views go way up, subscriptions are like tripled overnight because I just come on and talk about everything that's crappy about books I don't
Like
like.
I, I'm gonna get back to what I was gonna ask, but with the ranting, like I find channels that like they rant. So like, look, negativity spreads on YouTube. We all know this. This is not a secret. But I
Yeah,
think the channels that I see that are negative all the time or like really lean into the ranting, I don't think they do well long term. I think it's like it'll get people to click. I just don't think it builds
yeah,
that brand and like loyalty to a viewer if you're just
yeah,
always being negative.
right.
Whereas if you have like, I mean, even if you think of like Matt's fantasy book reviews, he is sometimes very negative but
Hmm.
he's also most of the time quite positive.
Hmm.
And I don't know why people think that this short-term gain is gonna help them in the long term. I guess it's just like a different mindset of like any views is good views, but I really don't like it personally.
I think in this particular corner of booktube, so to speak, that it gets referred to all the time, we don't have a whole lot of people, that
Mhm.
hang out in these chats and come to our live streams and all that happen to be booktubers that are on the negative angle. Um, I don't get those channels recommended to me because of what I watch and like, right? So every friend
Right.
of mine on booktube, obviously including you, I like all their videos. I hit that like button, and so my YouTube feed um, is constantly. It's always, obviously, the subscription feed is all of you guys, but the recommendations feed is mostly people who don't do all that ranting stuff. So I don't run across it all that much. I just feel like, for me personally, if I feel so strongly about something like I do with the magicians, then I'll do it. But otherwise, no. And I think the reason is because I think Lev Grossman knows how to write a sentence, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it. He's clearly educated. He's not. He doesn't read like somebody who doesn't know how to, like, know the English language pretty well.
Mhm.
But the fact that this book got such huge accolades, and I truly found it to be literally, like I say, the worst fantasy book I've ever read. It's it it's one of those, what realities am I living in, that so many people find this to be such great work, and I just don't understand the pathos that the main character is going through, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I do. I can read, all kinds of characters, from the most depressed in the world to the most hype characters. It's not a matter of me not getting them. It's just the huge boringness of that story. And
Yeah.
just, I literally was not rooting for a single character. I mean, there's Grimdark, right, where you're not sure who's good and who's bad, and how can I be rooting for Glocta, when he's a torturer? How can I be rooting for, Logan Nine Fingers when he's, essentially a sociopath, when he goes into the Bloody Nine, persona?
Mhm.
How can I be rooting for these guys? That, is more of a moral quandary, and in a case of a well written story. In the Magicians, it's like, how do I feel nothing but borderline loathing for every single character?
Yeah, it is interesting because, like, yeah, if I was just to be like, here's Logan Nine Fingers, a guy who does XYZ, and I was like, and here's Quentin, whatever fuckface that does that.
Uh-huh.
And it's like he's a much better person, but like, man, I don't care about him at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I wrote in my review that I wish that they burned that whole school down, like in chapter 2, and that was the end of it.
Pete, I don't agree with this comment at all. I am part of the Harry Potter generation, and that book is still trash. But what I was going to ask you is there a series that like you were really excited about? Maybe you read a few books in, or you got all the way to the ending that like totally missed the mark for you as an ending, like really disappointed you?
Off the top of my head, not really. No, I
Really?
mean, it's like,
That's
and some
interesting.
and some of those are, some of the ones that I've read have sort of a divisive fan base on it. So Dark Tower could be one of them, where I loved the ending, but I know a lot of people didn't. Um, Realm of the Elderlings, love it. But I know that some people were bored by the final book. I liked it so much it gave me a book hangover afterwards, because I was just processing the events, not only of that book, but the 15 books prior to it. What else? The big series. Gosh, let me look.
I mean, you like the end of Wheel of Time, I'm assuming.
I did.
Yeah.
I remember being very happy when I finished Knife of Dreams, because, and I think that was Robert Jordan's last book,
Yeah.
that it was good. And like, I read the whole series in 2021. So he'd already passed by the time that I read it. And I was really, really hoping that Knife of Dreams was going to be great, because I didn't want his last book to be something that I was just very mid on. And I don't hate the slog at all. I've said it many times
Mhm.
that I think on a meta level, it's okay for readers sometimes to be slogged in. But I don't know. I like that one. I can't really, off the top of my head, think of a series that just, in my
That's
opinion,
awesome. That's a
screwed the
good thing.
pooch. Yeah, it
Yeah.
screwed the pooch at the
Yeah.
end. Um,
I feel like there's quite a few that have like disappointed me. Not like hated, but there's been plenty of times where I've read the final book in a series and been like, "Ah, this kind of just didn't go where
you
I
know,
wanted it to go."
maybe since you mentioned it, maybe Harry Potter.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Maybe Harry Potter. I don't know. It's been so long since I read book 7, since I've really read any of
What are
them.
your thoughts on that? And just so you know, Harry Potter is part of the you can spoil it a little bit club. So like, I
Sure.
mean, don't like you can get a little bit specific because that's interesting. I
Well,
don't hear that very often.
it's not like, put it this way. I think maybe the epilogue of Harry Potter
Oh,
is
the
what
epilogue is terrible. Okay, yeah,
bothered
no,
me. So
yeah.
not the end of the story, just the end of that epilogue I felt was entirely unnecessary, and kind of wrecked it for me a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but no, I mean, as a whole, I did like Harry Potter. Actually, I liked the creation of the Deathly Hallows because it really kind of comes out of nowhere, and we spend, the last portion of this story involved in something that really wasn't a thing, in the earlier books. So I
Mhm.
liked that part of it. The books also get bigger, so there's more room for more things going on. So yeah, I mean, I think the epilogue of Harry Potter would probably be one, but not so much the last part. Um,
I think that's fair because that epilogue is not good.
yeah, but
Um,
in general, I mean, uh, I'll probably disagree with you on Harry Potter as a series. I loved it. I read it as an adult, so I don't know. There was just something about that whole thought of going to a magical school and having all of these cool moving staircases and going to different classes to learn different magical arts. I found that to be far more interesting than the good versus evil parts about it. Like Voldemort to me was not a hugely compelling antagonist. And in fact, we get so much of this sort of pseudo antagonist in Snape, throughout, most of the series, who I found to be far more interesting, than
oh yeah,
Voldemort.
for sure.
And I think that would probably be pretty universal. But uh, yeah, I just loved the whole concept of it. And I know it's not obviously the first magical academia story ever written, but it's the first one that I just really felt like I was part of. I felt like when they were in those classes, I was there too, even though I was an adult when I was reading it. So I really happen to like that series a lot.
That's awesome. That's good. I mean, I always say like Harry Potter is my like number 0 series in the sense that when I'm talking about my favorite series, I say, A Song of Ice and Fire, I'll say, Stormlight, I'll talk about Dandelion Dynasty or Tolkien or anything. But really, my favorite series, like that stands above them all is Harry Potter. And just that I've
Sure.
moved on from Harry Potter
Yeah.
so much that I don't
Yeah.
think about it. But it's like I've read that series easily 20 times, like
Oh,
so many
wow.
times. And like it was like I read it every year as a kid, and then I read it more every time a book came out. It was just like my entire childhood. So it's like, of
Yeah.
course, that's one of my favorite series.
Sure.
But I don't think about it as one of my favorite series very often. I think it's just maybe we
Stands
all
on
have
its
like
own.
we have a
Yeah.
mental cutoff in our brains. Because I find this with a lot of people where like stuff you read when you were younger doesn't count as much as one of your favorites, which I find interesting because it's
I don't,
still. Do you
yeah,
agree or do you
maybe.
disagree?
I don't know. I mean, I think the quality of the material that you were reading, as a kid was probably better than what I was reading as a kid. Um, so I mean, it's not a stretch to say Harry Potter is probably better than a bunch of the Piers Anthony books that I was reading at the time that you were of the age to read Harry Potter.
I've
So
heard bad things about the Piers Anthony books.
but when you're a kid, you don't recognize that.
For
There's
sure. No,
some
I totally
misogynistic
agree. Yeah,
stuff.
no.
And, honestly, this is the early 80s, and that's just what things were. Um, for good or otherwise. That's how things were. And it just wasn't noticed. But just in general, the quality of the material is better. So
Mhm.
I think that it's cool that it's your series zero. I don't know if I have
Yeah,
a
no.
series zero. It's a good question. 'Cause it's
Yeah,
like
I
it's funny because when I did my top 10 fantasy list last year, Realm of the Elderlings was number 1. I don't know if it will be this year. So because it's like as I read more and think things through of things that I have read, may drop down. I don't know. We're gonna see.
That's interesting. I'm gonna put a pin in that because I really want to come back to it. But we've had a couple questions about your
Sure.
Dune in the background there. So
Yeah,
somebody had asked earlier, it might have even been Samwise,
it was.
if you've
Yeah.
read past Dune, and then he's saying, "What do you think of them if you have?"
Yeah, so I've not read past Dune. I've read Dune. I've seen both the Dune movies. I have, which is the one that I have behind me here? Dune Messiah. I have that. I recently got that book. So I'm going to read that before the end of the year for sure. And then I'll read the next one after that. And then I don't know what I'm going to do. It's just like I said, these priority
Mhm.
series are really taking over the TBR mountain. But no, I'm interested in Dune Messiah. I like Dune for a lot of different reasons. Somewhat more on a spiritual level than on just the action adventure, side of Dune. I don't really care that much about the sandworms, or although I will say the octo helicopters are very cool.
Yeah.
But I do like the spiritual side of Dune. For me, is what hits, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I read Dune at the right time. I read it like right when I was first getting into fantasy, and I hadn't read very much sci-fi, and it was just a slog. And it was the first book that my wife ever just like petitioned me to DNF because she's like, every time you pick up this book,
You're
you just
like,
complain.
just a
And I was
big
like,
long
no,
sigh.
I'm like, it's like one of the most well-respected books of all time. She's like, please just stop reading it. And then
Mhm.
I eventually finished it on audio, and I was like, yeah, like I mean, I guess it was fine. But since then, I've first of all read a lot more, and secondly,
Sure.
I've watched the movies, so now
Yeah.
I have a good sense of who's who and what the politics are and what the story is actually trying to do.
Yeah.
So I actually one of my goals for this year, which I'm not going to make, but I'm going to make a priority for next year, is to reread Dune and then read the sequels because I
Sure.
think now I'm in way more of a spot to really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think so. And Dune, like a lot of series or a lot of science fiction in general, and in some cases, some of the more dense fantasy, wouldn't be something that I would recommend as for a new fantasy or sci-fi reader. Now, Mike, on the other hand, that was his jam. He read it when he was like 14,
Hmm.
and he was at a time and space in his own personal life where he just really felt a kindred spirit with Paul Atreides. And so I think he is kind of the exception to that rule, but I would not recommend Dune as being one of your first entries at all. And I would be willing to bet that you'll find all kinds of things in a reread of that
Oh, for sure.
now that you're
Yeah.
far more of an experienced reader.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that it's going to be different now. And like, it's interesting because the Dune movies were such a huge hit, and I'm obviously the Dune novels have had a sales bump. Like that's going to
Sure.
happen.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen like in our sphere, a lot more people talk about Dune, but I haven't seen like, casual people that I know on the street talk about reading Dune very much. I don't think it's just a very hard sell as a if you don't read a lot or if you
Yeah.
are like used to more modern novels.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of a single person that I know that has like just like been, in my social circle that's like, "Oh, yeah, I picked up and read Dune,"
Sure.
um, which is just interesting to me,
I mean, I think that also Dune's kind of a strange book,
for
and
sure.
where you'll get the mass people reading, A Song of Ice and Fire. They will read that because they see the series and it's cool, but it's not strange like Dune. Obviously, Harry Potter is not strange. It's very straightforward. There's not a bunch of hidden elements to it that you have to have a certain level of awareness to kind of suss out that Dune requires. So yeah, I agree with you. Dune's not really
Mhm.
getting much, mainstream booktube
Yeah, and
drive. And we got to remember too, these books are so old, right? And it's,
yeah.
it's so funny that when we talk about these books of the year, and it cracks me up that like here I am talking about a book of the year that was probably written before I was in kindergarten, with Shogun, right?
Yeah.
Last year, Lonesome Dove. It was written in the mid '80s. It's so interesting to me that we get into some of these books or series, but particularly some of the standalones that were written forever ago. And it's like BookTube makes it a deal like, this thing just came out, 2 months ago.
Yeah. Even just like on more modern novels, like the thing is weird. I've been seeing Rage of Dragons get a lot more like hype
Hmm.
recently, and like that came out in 2017 or something like that, and then the sequel came out in 2021 ish. So like it's a very modern series, but
Hmm.
now it's like getting a new wave. It's like all the people read it at first, and then it kind of died down waiting for the sequels. And then now I see a bunch of people being like, "Hey, I'm reading Rage of Dragons and I'm loving it." I'm like, "Yeah, it's just funny how that works."
Yeah, absolutely. Shogun
Ian
hype
has
is,
a
yeah.
question. The Shogun hype is so real right now after the Emmys. Should I watch the show or should I read it first? I'm going to let you answer first, Brian, as it's
Okay.
your time of the year right now.
I think you should read it first if that's, if that's a choice you're entertaining, because there are elements of the adaptation that don't get covered, that are great in the book. And I think that if you read the book, you will miss nothing in the adaptation. And in fact, you might appreciate the adaptation more because so many of us have read books that the adaptations have been just okay and not, outstanding. And here we have an adaptation that truly is outstanding on almost every level. And they've changed a couple of things here and there to make it a little bit more digestible, I think, for a mainstream viewing audience. But there are some things, particularly where it involves Japanese culture and some of the Japanese characters that get more page time than they get screen time in the adaptation because there's only so many episodes. So I would read the book first and then I would 100% watch that show. If you have an opportunity to watch it in 4K, try to do that because it's filmed just unbelievable.
Yeah. I don't think there's really a wrong answer. I do know, just knowing Ian's like reading schedule and like methodology a little bit, that I have a feeling if it's a really long book, you're either going to try and binge it really quickly or burn yourself out on it, Ian. And in which case, I would say maybe watch the TV show first because it would give you the investment in the book to like not have to feel like you need to like rush through it. But I think Brian's way is perfectly valid too because when I like the show more than the book, because there's a lot of like little writing quirks that James
Hmm.
Clavell does that I just didn't like as much, and obviously in a show that's not there. But what I did like about reading the book first and then watching the show is how much I could appreciate all the little details and all the little cultural stuff that I got way more
Sure.
context for in the book.
Yeah.
Um, Now, what I would say is for a streamlined experience, I think the show is like, I mean, a masterpiece. It is incredibly good and it gets people like, I don't think there's very much confusion about what's going on when people watch it, which I think
Hmm.
is really hard to do in something that immersive and foreign to
Hmm.
a lot of people. So I would almost recommend if you wanted to watch the show first, because it's like, 10 hours of your time versus however much it would take you to read it. If you watch it first and then read the book, you can always come back and rewatch the show. It's good enough to rewatch it, and then you'd catch all those details from the book that you. So it just kind of depends on where you're at.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
mean, I think some of it too is personal taste and how you like
absolutely.
stories, right? So, like we talked about earlier, I prefer to generally read the books first and
Mhm.
then watch. So that could influence my answer there too, because it's just a general preference. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't think it's there's some things that I would recommend doing one over the other for sure. Like, but both Shoguns are just very well done. So it
Mhm.
just depends on
Yeah,
preference.
I mean, it's pretty awesome that, we're debating which of two amazing, you know, where
Yeah.
the book is, phenomenal and the show is phenomenal. It doesn't happen all the time. It's pretty rare that it does. So,
Also, the show just has phenomenal acting. Like the
yeah.
main 3 people in that show or main 4 people in that show,
Yeah.
including, Yabu, just
Yabu is just
just
blow away.
killing it, just
Yeah. And
unbelievably
and
good.
and I have to say of the adaptation, to me, the only part better in the adaptation than the book was the performance of Yabu. Because
Mhm. Yeah.
that guy just, I mean, when I read the book, you have a certain sense of who he is, but I developed a much richer and deeper understanding of him watching that actor. Um, Talk
I would
about just like hidden gem star of the show, even though he wasn't one of the big three.
No, I totally agree. I would also say the same though for Hiroyuki Sanada playing
Oh yeah,
Toranaga.
oh yeah,
I mean he's always been a phenomenal actor, but the amount of stuff he's doing on his face, like
yeah,
he'll have a scene where he says 2 lines of dialogue in that show,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm just like glued to how he's choosing to like inform the look on his face or like
Hmm.
the silences he takes in between the
Mhm.
lines, like like really good. I'm so glad he won Best Actor
Oh,
because he really
absolutely.
deserved it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, real quick, we had a couple people, talking about how popular Dune is, and I just want to say I understand Dune is one of the best-selling sci-fi books of all time. I just mean
Mhm.
like based on the adaptation, I would have expected more people to have like picked it up and then immediately found it. I just haven't seen that. Like maybe Manitoba doesn't like sci-fi, but it's just a weird little segue thing that I thought happened. Shogun Cradle.
I wonder if Wheel of Time has experienced that at all. Probably not, because the
See, I
series
think that it has.
it
That's what
has it?
I
Yeah.
feel like a lot. I've seen a lot of people picking up Wheel of Time, and I'm talking about in my like. I mean, I'm invested in the book Instagram and book YouTube, so I see all
Sure.
those people picking it up, obviously. But
Yeah.
I've known upwards of 7 people, maybe off the top of my
Wow.
head, in my real life that have been like, "Oh yeah, I picked up like the Wheel of Time,"
Oh,
and
wow.
they'll talk to me about it because they know that I'm a fantasy reader. So I'll be the
Sure.
person they know that reads fantasy. So like, yeah, I'm trying that like Wheel of Time series. It's like really good. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's okay. Like
If you like a million women characters with the first initial L, it's amazing.
there's a lot of M's too, I feel like.
It's like, I think the thing that drove me, and I'll answer Slay's question in a second. I think the thing that drove me most bonkers about Wheel of Time, and again, I really love the series. It's in my top 10, but some of the prologues got so long, and then you realize that it's just background noise. It's not important to the story at all. It's just more kind of historical context.
Mhm.
And it doesn't really inform much about where we're at in the story. So that kind of drove me crazy because they were introducing all these new characters in these prologues. And I'm trying to remember, okay, I got to remember this person, like a dozen of them. And then they're never mentioned again in the entire series. So I felt like it was an unnecessary brain drain on me to try to remember a bunch of characters that literally would not exist in the rest of the series after the prologue. So,
Yeah, it's
my thoughts on Neuromancer. All right. Well, just in general, Neuromancer is the defining book for cyberpunk. It is absolutely the creator, in my opinion, of what cyberpunk is when we think of that aesthetic, from the kind of dark, rainy, neon lit Japanese kind of grimy, grungy, cyberpunky feel. That's what we get with Neuromancer. The it's kind of, I'm trying to remember, plot wise, it was okay to me. The thing that I think I liked most about Neuromancer is that it set up the board for everything else to come in that genre. So the book itself, to me, it was better than mid. I mean, it was good-ish. I don't think it's great. Like, it didn't completely engross me, but for not for Neuromancer, there is no Matrix. If not
mhm.
for Neuromancer, there's probably no Snow Crash. So I think that it's just so influential, it's got to get some flowers for that. I liked the main character, but I didn't love the main character. It was just all pretty good, accepting, like I said, for its vast and tremendous influence on the cyberpunk vibe and atmosphere. For that alone, it's hugely seminal work. Yeah,
Awesome. I bought this recently, and I first of all, I really love the striking green cover. I really like it.
yeah,
I just realized right now this is less than 300 pages, which is dope because what I was
yeah.
gonna say is I'm reading this in December. I finally I'm gonna read it. I've never read a cyberpunk book in any like I have no history with the subgenre, and I recently talked to Adrian Tchaikovsky, who said that he thinks that's going to be the next boom in sci-fi, which is
Hmm.
interesting. And I've been wanting to read some, friends of the channel, their favorite books for a long time. So
Hmm.
in December this year, I've decided that month, apart from Wind and Truth, I'm just going to read some favorite books from some friends of mine that I've always kicked down the can. And I know this is one of Kai's favorite books,
Cool.
who is. So I'm gonna give that a chance, and hopefully I
Did
really
you
like it.
did you play the Cyberpunk 2077 video game?
No, I
Okay,
honestly
so,
think my only like interaction with cyberpunk at all is the Matrix. Like I don't think I've
sure.
experienced it anywhere else.
Sure. Um, Yeah, I mean, like everything from like sword arms, and body modifications to have kind of, bioengineered genetic mechanical implants that, do certain things. That's all right out of Neuromancer. Um, so yeah, hugely important work. I story wise, it's all right, but yeah, very cool.
And see, now all these people coming out of the woodworks wanted me to consider them. Ian, you have a book on the list. Evie also has a book on the list, but I will come out and tell you all what the book is at the time.
Cool.
Neuromancer was just mentioned, so I thought I would mention that.
Awesome.
Uh, but I do want to circle back to Robin Hobb because I'm
Sure.
reading Fate, and Fool's Fate is incredible. Do you agree with that?
You got to remind me which book it
That's the
is.
that's the end of Tawny Man.
And yeah, it's really good. They're all really good. Like the only book that I thought was just sort of okay was the first book in Rain Wilds, but I even like the last couple of books in Rain Wilds. So I don't, the problem is I read these books so long ago, Kyle, that I don't remember specific timing
Right.
of when events occurred in each book. But
When did you read it? Do you remember
oh
the year
God,
or the years,
I mean,
plural?
like more than 15 years ago. I mean, I know that
Wow.
I think I read, I want to say, I think I read the final book when it came out. So it would have
Okay.
all been before that.
So the final, like Assassin's Fate came out in 2017, which wouldn't have been
Yeah.
that long ago. But like,
So,
you mean the
so,
final of Tawny Man?
well, I mean, I remember starting the books back then, um,
Interesting.
and reading them essentially, I think as they came out, or maybe I read Farseer after all three had come out and I had read that and then sort of kind of kept up. It's hard for me to remember a little bit.
Right. Yeah,
A lot
from
of
that long
night, a
ago.
lot of
Yeah.
time in the nightclub, brother. You know what it's like, lose some brain cells. But yeah, so I did read Assassin's Fate in 2017 when it came out. And just in general, I've never been somebody who like highlights quotes on a Kindle or
Mhm.
writes down quotes in a journal that move me. But the only series I've ever done that for really is Realm of the Elderlings, because
Really?
I think that in many ways, some of the things that the main character Fitz is going through, I felt a kindred spirit of just some frustrating events going on in my own life. And this whole slice of life as he goes from this child to an older guy, when he was sort of kind of in his, 30s or whatever, I really felt very similar vibes to what he was feeling. And I found myself taking computer notes on quotes that I read. And I was actually going through an old hard drive of mine. And here I found a bunch of Realm of the Elderling quotes that were meaningful to me at the time. And it brought me exactly right back to where I was and reminded me how just what a tremendous author she is, to be able to pull out in a fantasy story just the human condition in
Mhm.
ways that I hadn't really read that much of before.
No, I totally agree. I'm always like continuously impressed with how good she is because last night I was reading, and just for anybody worried, I'm not going to spoil anything about Fool's Fate, but I was reading the book, and there's like a random line that comes in, and if people have read the book, they probably know maybe what line it is, but it's not like some bombastic, like nobody dies, nothing like overly dramatic is technically happening if I was to just tell you what's going on. But the line is so much accumulation of the previous 6 novels and how we have been taking this journey with Fitz and his relationship with another character. And it's so neatly, succinctly, and beautifully summed up in this one sentence that I was like making a sandwich and I like
Hmm.
right before that scene, it wasn't dramatic at all. And then this sentence hit, and I just started tearing up like immediately, like while I'm making a sandwich. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is like I have to like stop what I'm doing and go physically read the rest of this scene. And just that she's
Yeah.
able to do something so powerful
Yeah.
with like character is just so astonishing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it. Like I said last year when I did the top fantasy series,
And
it sat atop the list.
and you think something might knock it off this year?
I don't know. as I've read more in the last year and as I've created booktube content, and the one thing that I've noticed about booktube stuff, and even though I don't do a ton of reviews, I'm thinking about different aspects of books on a deeper level than just the kind of the cursory reading for enjoyment things. You know, the adage of "you are who you hang around" I think applies in some regard here. So if you talk to a Philip Chase enough, or you watch enough AP Canavan videos, or you see Janny Wurts talking in an interview, you start to recognize some things that maybe you didn't see in a first read. And I think it's not to say that any of that would unseat Realm of the Elderlings, but I'm looking at things, I think, on a better level as a reader from having this booktube channel for the last 11 months or 10 months or wherever we're at. That I think I can make a better list of really where I'm at than just what I personally enjoyed.
Hmm. I think all this just sounds like you need to reread Realm of the Elderlings. I think it's been time.
I
So
don't reread, man. It's like
yeah,
I know there's
I
a
know you
huge
don't,
value.
and it's crazy
It's
to me.
it's a shame. I probably will at some point. There's probably some series like Realm of the Elderlings. There's a couple that I would like to reread. Realm of the Elderlings and The Dark Tower are two series that, if I was going to reread anything, it would be those two.
Hmm.
Maybe not so much A Song of Ice and Fire, only because I remember the events, for the most part, pretty clearly from the show, and even the stuff that was written after, the show ran out of their own ideas or whatever. I still remember it pretty well, but there's so many series out there that I want to experience. And I know that I'd absolutely get more out of reading Realm of the Elderlings right now from start to finish than I did the first time. There's no doubt. There's just so many other things that I want to talk to everybody about that I haven't read yet. So
Yeah.
it's a tough
Yeah,
one,
it's
man.
always a constant struggle for me. Like I think there's two types of people who don't reread. There's people who like yourself would theoretically be down for
Hmm.
rereading, but just like wants to read so many things that like it just never is really an option for them. And I totally get that. But there are some people who are just like, "Oh, I've already read it. Why would I ever want to reread it?" And I'm like, "I don't
Sure.
understand that at all. Like there's plenty of value you could get."
Oh,
But
absolutely. And
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and in a 16 book series, you don't remember anything. I mean, if you add up everything you remember in 16 books, it's probably one book's worth, right? I
Yeah.
mean, especially if you've read hundreds of fantasy novels since then. So, like, as I have. So,
Mhm.
I mean, it would, in some regard, feel new. So,
Yeah.
I'm not
But,
opposed to it,
you
but
got
man,
that big TBR mountain.
TBR Mountain
What
is
are some of
just,
the things you wanna get going in the next few months or early next year that you're
well,
really prioritizing?
January starts in January, and that's when John and I are doing our read along of Wars of Light and Shadow. And we're going to do a book every other month till we rock out all 11 books. And it's going to be awesome. And there's some other booktubers joining us, which I think is going to be really fun. So that's a huge priority series for me. I really want to read P.L. Stewart's books, and I hear such great things about him, and he was kind enough to send them to me. So I want to get to those. I really want to read the Dandelion Dynasty that Evie sent to me that I need to get to. I really need to read Mike Shackle's Last Ward trilogy that a viewer sent to me that I haven't got to yet. Um, so yeah, there's just a lot of stuff out there. And the other part of this is that I'm in the middle of a Malazan read. So I'm about
Oh, jeez.
30%. I'm 30% into Memories of Ice right now, and I'll finish that in about, I don't know, 10 or 12 days. Yeah, Bloodsworn's on the list, Heidi. That is coming up on Friday. So yeah, I mean, I'm into Malazan as well. And I suspect that's going to take a big piece of next year as well. Because I'm going to take a little bit of a break after House of Chains, which is book 4 in Malazan.
Mhm.
And to sort of timing wise, get into Wind and Truth, because I suspect all you're going to see on BookTube in the month of December are everybody's annual top 10 lists and Wind of Truth thoughts. That's basically what you're going to find on like every channel. Um, so I think, December's somewhat spoken for. Yeah, interesting, cool.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I really want to read more Janny Wurts since Janny's here and we were talking
mhm.
about that. I think I'm going to read to ride Hell's Chasm
Do
first,
it, do it.
before diving into an 11-book series. But
Absolutely.
I have been collecting because my like used bookstores will have like
Yeah,
book 7 or whatever. So I'll just like pick it up, and I have most of those books now. So I
yeah.
when I'm ready to start, I'll be ready to start. But I don't know if I can do Malazan and Wars of Light and Shadow at the same time. That sounds crazy, man.
Well, that's why I'm sort of like taking a little bit of a break after House of Chains.
Yeah,
And the good news is that Philip and I think Joanna and AP and a bunch of other people have recap videos on all of those books. And I think
yeah.
Mike does too. And so even if I take 6 or 7 months off between books 4 and 5 of Malazan, I'm just going to go back and watch their videos. And I know they're going to be comprehensive and I know
Yeah.
it's going to bring it all back. Um, Regarding Jenny Wurts, whether she's in this chat or not, I cannot say highly enough about To Ride Hell's Chasm. My mom is reading it right now and she
Oh,
loves it.
awesome.
And she doesn't read fantasy and she is loving this book. I think one of the things that I find that she has in common with Gavriel K is she's just really, really good at picking the perfect word and dropping it in the perfect place. And that to me, if you like GGK, I see no real reason why you wouldn't jibe in with her books. But she'll be the first to tell you, read To Ride Hell's Chasm first, because if for whatever reason it just doesn't work for you, writing style, then yeah, I mean, you can clear off a lot of space for your TBR for an 11
Yeah.
book big series. That said, knowing what you like, I can see no real reason. I mean, you hated The Magicians, so you're already like 1,000 points ahead on my calendar, on my scale. I can't. I would really doubt that you would dislike To Ride Hell's Chasm. There's so much going on. It would be unfair for me to try to even sell you on it because you're already sold on it. You're gonna try it.
Yeah, and I did, I mean, the Empire trilogy, which I know she co-wrote, so it's not
Mhm.
just her, but I
Yeah,
loved the Empire trilogy. So I already
yeah.
have foundation in some of her writing.
Hmm.
And I actually sampled the first chapter of Triad Hell's Chasm
Hmm.
last year, and I
Yeah.
found that I really liked the writing. So that's people's
Then you're
usually
gold.
their biggest worries. So I think
Then
it's gonna go well.
then you're
Yeah.
gold. And I have to tell you that one of the things that I loved not most, but one of the things I liked a lot about that book is that it's a very tight cast. And that's kind of a reoccurring theme for me is that yes, I do enjoy Wheel of Time with a billion characters. Yes, I do enjoy Malazan with a billion characters, but I really do appreciate when we can deep dive into a handful of them and really get to know them. And a standalone is perfect for that because there's just simply not enough space, right,
Mhm.
to develop 18 characters and to be
Yeah.
on 14 continents. To Ride Hell's Chasm, man, you get everything. You get character, you get plot, you get mystery, you get magic, you get insanely compelling and addictive writing where it's like if you were ever thinking about writing a book and you read her book now that she would say absolutely not to this, but I go, there's no way I could ever write a book. Look at how awesome she is at it. Talk about
I
just a command of the English language like nobody else.
That's what I hear. Like, you have me so excited. Like, I wish I could just start this book now. Like, that's the problem of talking to people about books they love. Is I'm just
Hmm.
like, do I really need to read Midnight Tides? Like, I just want to read this now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's there, and the cool
Yeah.
part about it is that hey, it's a standalone. It's not going to take you forever to read
Mhm.
it, and it's enjoyable the whole way through. At least it was for me. So there's no, hey, well, just wait till you get to the second half, and then it's good
Right.
right off the get go. So you're good.
Awesome. Regarding other series you're talking about, I have been kicking the Mike Shackle trilogy down the
Hmm.
road for a long time. So when you're in and around about to start it, like send me a message. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
buddy read
Well.
it because I really need a kickstart to start that series.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I'm going to like it because
Yeah.
everybody that I agree with tells me how good it is. So,
Yeah. I totally agree. And even some people that don't always align with me on books, the things that they say about this seems like this will be one that I do align on. And like
mhm.
I said, a viewer was nice enough to send me um, the whole trilogy. So
It's very
I have
nice.
I have no excuse not to read it. Absolutely. I
Mhm.
never thought anybody would send me a book. I mean, really, like, it blows me away in on
This
every.
community is so nice. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
It's
Evie
like
sent me those Dandelion Dynasties too, and I'm just in awe. Evie's the best. And
yeah, it's
everybody else who sends books to people is also the best.
yeah, it's just it's fun, because we
Yeah.
get, it's always it feels better to give a gift than to receive a gift, and
Mhm.
I feel that way too, and I think it's just a blast to be able to do those kinds of things.
No, I agree. We do have to talk about one series that we have not discussed yet that we don't agree on. Do you know what series that is?
We don't agree on it. Is it one that I like or one that I don't that you don't that I don't like?
One that you don't like.
One that I don't like.
I thought you would know immediately. I'm actually surprised.
One that I don't like. Um, is it Wandering In?
No, it's Cradle.
Cradle. Oh, how could I forget Cradle? Do you know what? I disliked Cradle so much I've erased it from the hard drive. Look,
Yeah, no doubt.
I'm not a spring chicken, right? I've only got so much RAM up in here. It was erased off the hard drive after it got good around the halfway through book 12.
I
Um,
well, that's the wild part. That's the part that I can't believe because book 12 is so mid. Like it's like we just like reversed our opinions on the series. It's so funny to
Yeah,
me.
I mean, there's a couple of books in that series that I felt like, hey, it's pretty good. I like the action going on. I like this and that. Just in general,
Yeah.
cultivation, progression fantasy isn't my jam. I don't really love
Mhm.
cultivation as a subgenre. And Cradle really it's heavily cultivation. It's not just,
Oh, very.
like
Yeah.
I'm reading other lit RPG series right now that have cultivation elements to it, and it's mostly when they sit down and do some meditation and open up their inner mana channels, and that can sort of fall into that cultivation category. But none are like entirely cultivation based the way that Cradle is. And I read it legit because I think I'm one of the few channels, Andrew does as well, but one of the few channels, at least on this corner of BookTube, that consistently talks about lit RPG. And I'm happy to do it just because they are some of the highest selling books in the genre for sure. Um, I feel like they have kind of really up until the kind of the what do you call it, the growth and the hype for Dungeon Crawler Carl, it almost kind of got looked down on a little bit and poo-pooed,
Mhm.
and I was like, you know what, you guys, I can read Malazan, I can read, Book of the New Sun. I, I'm not going to get poo-pooed for reading lit RPG when I'm reading these, very challenging and dense series as well, or Susanna Clark or Guy Gavriel K. So, or Janny Wurts for that matter.
Mhm.
So Cradle for me was a read that I wanted to do because it was important to me. And I know that it's not important to every booktuber, nor that it should be, but to have the street cred of saying, hey, one of the most popular selling lit RPG books out there, progression fantasy books out there is Cradle. For me to really have a well-rounded viewpoint, it shouldn't be a blind spot in my reading. And that's really why I read it. And I don't DNF things ever. And that applies mostly to series as well. So once I got into it, I was into it. And
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. What did you love
Yeah.
about it?
So I like the characters. Like I like it's so funny that like when I would look at reviews
Hmm.
of the books, I just like I am not the fan base for Cradle. And I don't even mean like in terms of progression fantasy so much. Like I just like people really love the training stuff and all of the like big fights and like some of the fights were cool, but I always thought they just went on too long.
Yeah,
But I really liked the character, and I liked the, like, overarching plot of, like, what their goals were in the series
sure.
and, like, the politics and stuff, but I
Hmm.
was really there for like, I mean, I think Ethan Aurelius is one of my favorite characters in anything. Like, I love that character.
Yeah, I mean, for me, he's clearly the highlight of that series. I
Yeah,
mean,
and even, like, as time went on, I liked Yaren and, Mercy and all the side characters. I think that ragtag group was just so fun for me. It also was narrated really well, which I think helped me get through the
hmm
earlier books.
hmm
I've always kind of liked just like Asian inspired stuff in general, so like the
hmm
aesthetic kind of works for me. But it's funny because like in book 10, something really major happens, and you'll probably know what that is. And that book blew my mind. And then I didn't like the last two books because
Yeah.
that thing
Sort of climaxed
changed.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was like, to me, that was like the end of the series. Like,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't literally, it just really changed. And then I looked at the reviews of the last two, and the fandom generally loved them because they were like,
Yeah.
oh, all the fighting and all the
Sure.
training. And I just was like, man, but like the heart of the series is just totally different now. So I don't really know. I wasn't the market for that series, and I somehow ended up loving it anyway until the end. But
Yeah. Like I said, I
too
mean,
long for sure.
I am not, generally speaking, I am not a street cred snob, when it comes to booktuber stuff. But like I said, there's just so few people. And now, of course, everybody seems to be talking about Dungeon Crawler Carl.
Mhm.
Like it's something new. Been reading this forever. Anyway, I'm not going to get salty on that. Every now and then Salty Petrick comes out on his channel. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
have to do a Salty Belltube episode one of these times, and I'll rant about all of a sudden now people like Dungeon Crawler Carl when I've been screaming it from the rooftops, literally in everybody's chat since I read the first book. Be that
You
as
might have
it
been the person that I heard from. You might have been. I heard about it in
probably,
chats. So
probably. But anyway, so I forgot what I was saying. Can I give a description of cultivation subgenre? Probably not, in a super interesting way here in an interview, but in general, cultivation is a little bit different in that when the character progresses, it's generally due to some inner work. It could be meditation.
mhm.
It could be coming to some inner realizations about themselves. It could be doing things that they grow as an inner kind of entity, and it opens up new abilities within themselves, as opposed to more game lit or lit RPG, which is much more a character actually does something to get abilities and
Yeah.
finds new items to get stronger. I find that to be much more interesting than cultivation. Although in real life, I meditate daily. I just, you would think I would be a big cultivation person, but it just reads boring to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't have like a big preference between the two, but I've only read Dungeon Crawler Carl of the more game mechanic-y ones.
Hmm.
But for me, the problem that I have with cultivation is just that, and this happened in Cradle all the time, where it's like they'll reach a mental block of why they can't progress.
Hmm.
And then it's just like the book is almost over and he's like, the secret to success is love. I'm more powerful. And I'm
Yeah,
like it's
it
just
feels a
whenever the
little
writer
unearned.
needs. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I totally, that's my problem with it
it,
too.
it feels unearned.
Um,
Um, yeah.
I have to get going right away, but I do have one last question which ties into this, which is what would you recommend a good lit RPG for people to start with?
Okay, that's a great question, and I'm glad I'm here to answer it for you. All right. So if you are an audiobook person, and I have two answers. If you're an audiobook person, clearly Dungeon Crawler Carl is where I would start with. Beyond that, there's two series that I recommend to most people. One would be The Good Guys. This is by Eric Uegland, and it's read by narrator Neil Helligers, who is just kick ass. I love this guy's narration so much. So The Good Guys would be one. He's also got a separate. Oh, you just popped in. Unbelievable. So now I can see you. Um, the
Oh,
good
really?
guy.
This is this whole
Yeah.
time?
Yeah. There you went
You know
again.
what
Yeah.
I just switched my tab real quick. That's the only thing that changed.
Interesting. Yeah, but it's got to be on your end then. Anyway,
Yeah.
so the Good Guy series by Eric Uegland, if you are listening on Audible. Also, He Who Fights with Monsters, if you're on Audible, by Travis Deverell, also known as Shirt Alone, are great lit RPGs. By the way, I do have a video on Belltube that talks about what are 10 great lit RPG series to read after you've already done Dungeon Crawler Carl, because I think that's the one that gets really the most hype.
Mhm.
And people don't know where to go from there. If you're not an audio listener, then I would probably do something like Awaken Online. That's by Travis Bagwell. And the first book there is called Catharsis. And again, on that video, I do a much deeper dive into all of those books. And so, yeah, go check it out.
Awesome. I do want to get into more because I read Dungeon Crawler Carl and like it was just on a lark, and it just
Mhm.
like the audiobook is incredible. And I've read the first three now, and I plan to finish the series. or catch up with the series, I should
Hmm.
say. But the more that I read of it, the more that I think that I just don't actually like the genre, and I just like how good like a lot of the like game mechanic-y things
Hmm.
are the things I like least of it. I
Hmm.
just find the story and the characters and the writing really funny and charming. So I
Yeah.
really want to try another one to see if I don't
Yeah.
like the genre or not.
There's I mean, I there and we'll do a part 2 to this chat. Hopefully we can come back on and talk
Yeah, for
more
sure.
about this. And I'll have you on my show too, by the way, for sure. You have a standing invite for the bell to toll for you.
I'd love
Um,
to.
but the thing about lit RPG is that there's a couple of different camps. There are the people that really love the game mechanic stuffs, right? These are the dice roller kind of readers, right? That they want to know the ins and outs of the game mechanics. They really love the technicalities of some of that. And that's great. I like some of that stuff. There's also the other readers like you that are there for a compelling story. And I know of some great lit RPGs that are very light on the dice rolling, mechanic crunchiness is the term that they use.
Mhm.
The more crunchy the series is, the more, math is involved, so to speak.
Right.
Where the less crunchy or not crunchy at all, it's all character and story focused. I definitely have some recommendations for you that I think you may find the genre to be more interesting than you think because there are
Oh,
so
I'm
many
sure that I
series
will. Yeah.
that don't have that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that like your first interactions with a genre or subgenre can sometimes just be what you happen to pick up with. There's people that are like, I don't like sci-fi because I read The Martian and it was too silly. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, I mean, there's lots of other stuff, but
Right.
no.
Absolutely. And
Brilliant answers on this.
yeah,
I really I like that you are the lit RPG guy because I think you have really a lot to say about the subgenre and you're like validating it to a lot of people, I find.
it's not to be poo-pooed. Some of these authors are absolutely brilliant and they're hilarious. Eric Uegland is funny to me as Joe Abercrombie is in many cases. And I feel like in some regard, if I'm not talking about him, at least like kind of in this corner of BookTube, there's not a lot of people that are. And because
Mhm.
I've read hundreds and hundreds of lit RPG books, I feel like I have some credibility, at least in my own opinion, of it because I'm pretty well read in the genre.
Mhm. Um, as a wider thing, one last thought before we go. I
Yeah.
did a similar thing to you reading Cradle, is that I'm reading Sarah J. Maas,
Hmm.
and the reason for that is that in when I'm talking about fantasy, it's just a really big blind spot, and
Hmm.
I don't think, I'm gonna fall in love with her series by
Yeah.
any means. Like,
Yeah.
I've thought they were all just, like, fine. Like, just not
Yeah.
really for me, but I don't have any, like, big criticisms, but I feel like I'm able to talk about the genre a lot better, just by being able to read this massive author and see what they're actually saying and contributing to the genre.
Yeah, I mean, you're a booktuber and you're never going to be worse off, right? I mean, unless you read the magicians, but you're never
I
going
was
to
worse
be,
off.
you were, and rightfully so. But just reading something like Akatar, you're not going to be worse off for it. You're going to have an opinion on it, right? Rather than this glaring blind spot of what is
Mhm.
selling the most at every Barnes and Noble right now. And I think
Absolutely.
as a booktuber, again, I'm not a big street cred guy, but there is something to be said for having an opinion on something that is very in the very popular mainstream right now and being able to talk about it a little bit, whether you love it or whether you don't. So it's really no biggie to read that series. It reads very fast.
Yeah.
I did the book one on a buddy read with my niece. She'd asked me to read it with her. She was kind of going through a tough time and wanted to read a book with her uncle. So I said, sure. Um, was it my favorite? No. Is Akatar going to creep up that top 10 fantasy series list? Sneak peek. It is not. But I don't
But
feel
that
worse.
experience with your niece is gonna be special, even if it's the book
Absolutely.
itself wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the awareness of what it is, to be able to talk about it a little bit as somebody who's on BookTube, I think, it just makes it a little bit more well-rounded.
Well, you guys heard it here first. Brian thinks that I have street cred now, so,
You do.
it is now
And
a fact.
and you hate the magicians. So I mean,
I'm
like
rising up in the esteem. I'm headed all the right places.
you're almost getting a Quilluminati invite right off that.
Well, thank you so much for spending some of your afternoon with me, Brian. It was a pleasure. I knew we had hit it off, and I'm so glad that we did, and we
Let
we agree on almost everything. except for the end of Cradle, which is fine with me.
You know what? Even the best of friends don't agree on every single book. So
Absolutely.
that's that 1% that we disagree on. Those are fun things to talk about. But yeah, let's do this again. I'll come on your show, and like I said, you have a standing invite for the bell to toll for you on mine.
Sounds good. I look forward to you having to ask all the questions.
And that's
And
great.
chat, as always, you guys were killer. Thank you so much for showing up. It seems like people really like the Monday afternoon where they can listen while they work. So you guys let me know if that's something that you are like, because I'm always free in the daytime. The problem is finding other people that are free in the
I
daytime.
love doing these in the day. I mean, like
That's nice.
literally, as I reflect on how I'm going to move my show forward, it very well may be during the day because I get too amped up at night after talking to somebody about books for so long and running a show, and I'm hypo after it. And it's like, God, I can't sleep, man. I'm just fired up.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be tuning in if it's during the day. Those are the times that I'm available. So anyway, thank you all
Perfect.
for coming, and we'll see you guys next time.
Awesome.
The next episode of Kyle's Corner should be next Wednesday. It is with the author Nicholas Eames and my good friend Jake Bishop. We are
Cool.
going to have a talk, and it should be a fun time. So see you
Love
all
his
then.
books. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for
so
having me.
fun. Yeah, absolutely, Brian. See you all later.